Hi, my name's Russ, and I thought I'd show you how I made a zero insert plate for my Delta Unisaw to replace the one that came with the saw, which is this red painted piece of steel. So it's a very wide groove, which is not very good to avoid tear out of your wood. So I'm going to make one out of this polyethylene. It's high density polyethylene that you can buy in many places. The reason why I chose this material is because it's very slick, which facilitates the wood sliding very nicely on your table saw, and the fact that it's pretty flat. Other choices of plastic you could use would be Delrin or polycarbonate. They're very nice to machine, they're very good plastics. Delrin is actually my favorite plastic to work with, but it's a little bit more expensive than the others and it's a little harder to find. Acrylic would not be a good choice for this because acrylic is pretty darn brittle. It's great for other work because of its clarity and it's easy to glue up and assemble, but it's pretty fragile and is easy to crack. So I'm going to stick with this and let's get started. So I'm here at my table saw, and to get this plate out you just push down. It has a little knob here to prevent accidental kick out of the plate when it's in use. And one of the features I really like about the Delta design is it has these 4 tabs here that have set screws so that you can adjust very accurately the height of this table, of the insert relative to the table. And with a micrometer you can get it so it's only about 1/1000th of an inch below, so it won't catch on anything. And those are features that I will reproduce in this plate. There are a lot of ways one could make this zero insert plate, but the one I chose to use was to use this as a template, adhere to this surface, and use this as a router guide to cut the plastic. So if we're successful, the only thing that I'd ever use this piece again for is as a template. So to get started, I'll put some double-sided tape, which is available in Home Depot or Lowe's under the common name of just carpet tape. So it's used in that industry, and it's available as a 2-sided adhesive. A handheld razor blade is to peel up the other side of the plastic. There we go. Make sure this is clean, no dust. And then center it right on there. And making sure I have pieces overlapping the edges. And press down firmly. There we go. Template adhered to piece to be machined. On to the next step. Now you may have noticed that the piece of polyethylene that I used was slightly larger, and I cut it slightly larger than the template, so I just have to take off maybe 1/16th of an inch along the edges. But now I want to whack off these extra pieces on the edge without having to do that in the router, so I just make less of a mess in the shop and it's a little bit safer on the router table. So I will use my bandsaw for this. If you don't have a bandsaw, you could just as easily use a jigsaw and just clamp this in a vise to hold it still while you cut it. But we're going to use a bandsaw and just whack off these little edges. So there we have it. That's the rough cut piece ready for the router table. Just a little bit proud of the template in all dimensions. So that guide bearing will follow this template and make that a perfect image of that template once it's cut down. So let's get this into the router table. So we're here at the router table ready to make this cut, and I've installed the bit at the proper height so that the bearing follows this template at the correct point, and I want to make absolutely sure that there's no way that the steel cutter is going to hit this steel template. So I have a fence here. I don't really need a fence, but I like using a fence just in case it were to catch it and twist it around. So that'll prevent it from whipping around if it should catch that. So I'll just tighten up these holders here, back this away, and plug my ears for all the noise I'm going to make, and get started. And there we have it. A little bit of a notch there I need to clean up because it followed in that groove, which I hadn't quite anticipated in time, but that's no big deal. And I need to get rid of this little burr. But essentially it came out pretty well. I'll just clean it up and we'll move on. So now back at the table saw, I just want to check to make sure this will fit. So we still have the adhered template attached to the plastic, and you can see it made a very nice guide and seems to be just fine. But I just want to check to make sure. I can't drop this in because obviously the blade is still in the way a bit, but I can tell that just by moving it back and forth. You can see it drops here, it drops in there, so it's going to work as we had hoped. So now our task is to separate the plastic from the template. And how I chose to do this was with screwdrivers. Very carefully insert the narrowest tip screwdriver that you own first between the two and create a little bit of a groove, and then work it around with others to separate it. To tell you, that's not going as well as I thought. To tell you the truth, I have no idea how I ended up with so many screwdrivers, but they come in handy once in a while. So there we go. Peel the orange, separate it, and there we are. A perfect divorce, right? Here we go. Ta-da! The next task is to transfer the locations of the set screws. The set screws are used to level this and make this perfectly parallel with the table saw. So I'm going to quickly remove these. I don't need to show you all the details, but what Delta has decided to use are 1/4 by 28, so they're 1/4 diameter but 28 pitch set screws. I'm going to use 1032 because I happen to have them, and there's no reason why these won't work. They're actually a little bit finer pitch and they may work a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is remove these, put them back on top, and then hold them in a clamp and transfer them over. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll be back. So here we go, into the clamp, line it up, and then with my handy knee, tighten the clamp. Since these are well mated, they hold quite nicely in this vise. Ideally, I would use a transfer punch like this to transfer those holes. And make sure that they transfer. perfect. You may not be able to see that, but they did leave a nice little indentation there that will be perfect to guide the location of those holes. Now at the drill press, where I'll drill those taps holes for the 1032 threads. For a 1032 thread, we're going to want a number 21 drill, which is 0.159 inches in diameter. So let's get these drilled. Okay, all ready for tapping. So now I have my zero clearance plate that has the holes drilled in my vise, and I need to tap those holes. So I have a 1032 tap here, and I'm going to use a jig that I had made a while ago that's made out of 1.5 inch diameter black Delrin. And this is flush cut on a lathe, and it's drilled so that hole is perfectly perpendicular to it, and you can see it fits quite nicely onto that tap, and that will act as a guide to make sure that those taps are perpendicular to the plate. So I'll hold that down and get this started. So there we go. Just 2 more to do. So, you get the drill? Ha ha ha. Now without the tap guide, you just make sure these holes are nice and clean and the tap goes all the way through. Lift that out, not to break any threads at the top. And there we go. One last piece of cutting I want to do on that hole is to put a little chamfer on it to remove that burr that's across the top. I could have done that before I tapped. I probably should have, but I chose to do it now, so it really makes a little difference. So here we go. You really only need to dust it just to clean it off a little bit. So here we have our set screws, and they just need to be inserted here. I'll use my fingers to let it catch that thread so I can feel it a little better. So there we go. One last thing to do. Cut it. Now, the final step before I adjust these set screws is to begin to cut that groove. Now, this is a very hazardous point, and I will explain what I'm going to do before I go and do it, because I won't be able to be talking over the running of the saw. Since my saw blade will not go down far enough, I cannot just sit this in there and then lift the blade to cut it. Right now it's riding on that saw. So I have no other choice than to slowly guide it down there with my hands while that blade is on. So I'm going to put on some hearing protection, and I'm going to very carefully do that, and hopefully we'll have no problems. Let me set up the saw, put my hearing aids on, and see how it works out. Perfect. Now that I have that initial cut done and the insert is sitting down in its hole just perfectly there, I can finish that cut using a more safe approach of holding this down with a clamp and a piece of scrap wood. But to do that, I first want to raise it up so that it sits a little bit proud of the table, so this clamp will be slightly more effective. So just screwing these in a little further will raise that up ever so slightly to get that up. This is not the final adjustment. I can do that later. But right now I just want it just a little bit proud of the steel top. And I'll take that little bit of rock out of it. One clamp. Should be all that is needed. Nice and sturdy. Bearing protection. And here we go. Okay, that went really well. Ready for the last step. I have my original throat plate in here to show you one more component that we need to add to our insert. And that is this little safety pin here. This safety pin catches under the top here, and what that is intended to do is to prevent your blade from ever kicking this plate back up at you. So we will put a pin in here to duplicate that, and what I'm going to use are little set pins, pins. You know, the pins, you can buy them, they're tapered at one end and they're designed for press fit. So these are 1/8 inch in diameter, 1/2 inch long, and you can get them from most supply houses. And we'll make a hole that's slightly smaller than 1/8 inch in the right spot and just press that in while it's held in a vise with us. The location of that pin is not all that critical, but you need to make sure it's at approximately the right height and around the center of your piece. So I have the set screws now recessed inside the plastic, and the surface is flat, and I can line this up, and I notice that the edge of the hole is just slightly below the surface of the plate here. So I can just use that as a rough guide when I have it on the drill press to drill that out. I don't think I really need to measure it. So this is how I decided to drill that guide hole for that pin. So I decided to use the table as a clamping surface, and I clamped the insert after retracting those set screws up so that it's down flat on the surface with 2 small clamps. Then I use a guide here, which is actually a PC board plate, which is 28 thousandths inches thick, which I think would be enough to get it up just a little bit so it doesn't go through the edge. And I have a 3 millimeter, which is 0.18 inches in diameter. No, excuse me, 0.118 inches in diameter as a guide for that hole to make sure I don't go through it. So I'm just going to hand drill this with that blade as level as I can get it to this plate as a guide here. And that should be fine for press fitting an 1/8 of an inch pin. So we'll try that. Not sure if you will be able to see the placement of that hole, but I think it's going to work out just fine. I can always make it a little bit larger in diameter if required. Now back to the vise. Have it clamped in there rather tightly. And the pin and a little hammer, and we'll see how this goes. Looking good. Give it a try. Well, the pin worked really well. It's in here. See that? It makes a nice insert. The last thing you need to do is just to level it and have it just a little bit shy under the table by about 2/1000ths of an inch. The easiest way to do that is to get a small piece of metal, such as what I used for a guide a few minutes ago, and just make sure it doesn't catch. You'll elevate it up a little bit at a time so it catches, and then bring it back down. And you also want to make sure there's no rock. You can use a micrometer, which I own. This is something I built a few years ago, but it's a little bit overkill for this. I use it to set joiner knives. But just a piece of metal and set screw, Allen wrench, and you'll be fine. So last thing is just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.